I go around, I go to schools for one thing, I go to churches, I go to civic groups, I go to any place where they'll listen to me, and I try to impress on them that freedom was not free. We all had to pay a price for it. And don't take anything for granted, because nothing is free. You have to work for it. It comes to you. You get blessed if you work. So I'm going to try and tell you a few things. I've only got a few minutes. I've got notes in here that thick, but I don't like to use them. I like to just speak off the cuff. When we went in at Cherbourg, we were not on the initial run. We were 30 days after June 6th when we hit the beach, but they were only in 3 miles where we went in. So we didn't have any direct fire on us either, but we did have to climb down those rope ladders on the ship, like you see, and got in water like this and walk ashore. It was cold too. It wasn't warm. So anyhow, when we went into combat, our division was a division that was made up of drunks from Massachusetts. Yeah, I'm not kidding you. It was the National Guard of Boston, and you can't believe these guys. You know, some of them were 30, 40 years old, and they were drinking all day long. And when we kids came in there as replacements, a bunch of us, here we are, 18 and 19 years old, and they looked down their nose at us, and boy, they really treated us like garbage sometimes, until we proved ourselves in combat with them. But I'm going to tell you a funny story. When we were in training camp, they set up a boxing ring out in the middle of the field, and they were going to teach us young kids a lesson. So they had a fellow from Brooklyn. His name was Benny Violet, and he was a pro fighter. And he was one of these guys that, you know, he thought he could, it was really good. And they put him in the ring, and then they put our guys in there one at a time for a minute with Benny Violet. And finally it came to my turn. And I just said, I'm not going to fight him. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to go in the ring with him. So of course I got all the accolades, you're yellow, all this, you know. So finally I said, okay, put the gloves on me. So I went in the ring with him, and Benny's over there going through his routine. I can still see him. And they clanged on a pail with a spoon, and Benny came at me, and he threw a haymaker at me from way over here someplace. And I ducked, and I put one into his stomach right about up to here. And while he was falling, I hit him about 6 more times, and he went through the ropes, and his buddies caught him out there. See, I forgot to tell him, back in 39 and 40, we had golden gloves boxing in Minnesota. I was a champion for 2 years. But after that, we were treated with a little more respect. Anyhow, when we got into combat over there, our division was the Yankee Division. And it was well known. It had a history in World War I of a lot of medals and stuff. And I got a lot of medals too. I don't consider myself a hero, because I think all the heroes are buried over there. But I did get a lot of medals. I've been honored. I've been knighted by the President of France. I've got their top medal, their Legion of Merit medal. I've got medals from Luxembourg and Holland. I got them from France. I got them from all kinds of places. But I don't consider myself a hero. Those guys over there, they're the heroes. When we got through liberating Paris, they moved us up to northeast France. And there's a little town called Nancy up there. And we got a chance to get a shower and clean clothes. And it was just wonderful. And we're in there taking showers when word came that the Germans had started to break through. It was later to be called the Battle of the Bulge. They used everything Hitler had, he put it in there, and they were going to drive to the sea and split the Allies, and then he thought that, you know, we would sue for peace. So they loaded us on trucks. We didn't have a chance to get any warm clothes. We didn't get any warm socks. We didn't get any gloves. We had no earmuffs. They took us in trucks, and here we're going up to Luxembourg. They dumped us off in the woods that night, and there was snow about 8 inches deep. And we were cold. We had on our leather combat boots yet. You know how cold they can be. And I can remember just about all of us took our gas masks off and threw them away and put our feet in the bag and tried to get some warmth on our feet. We were cuddling together like lovers trying to stay warm at night, I'll tell you. It was really something. Then the Battle of the Bulge started, and we had our share of it. How many here believe in angels? Oh, good, because I can tell you 3 times I was saved by angels. Actually I was, and nobody can argue me out of it. Has anybody here ever heard of a Schmeiser machine pistol? Okay, we called them burp guns. When it fired, it went, and about 50 bullets came out. The fastest firing gun ever made, and it still is. A German would step from behind a tree with that gun, and he'd go, and he could fan it like this, and there'd be a bullet every inch. Twice, I was fanned that way, and the guy on both sides of me got hit, and I didn't. How can it miss me? Think of it. There's no way it could miss me. I had a hand in front of me. I had a hand in front of me. Another time, we hit a little shed out in the field somewhere there. And I was standing in the doorway talking to a kid from Philadelphia who was right here. I'll never forget him, Joe Hrusecki. Nice young guy that had just joined us. And I turned around like this and I heard a pop. And I turned around and Joe was gone. A mortar shell had come right down on his head and exploded, and it was just perfect where it didn't bother me. I didn't even feel the percussion. Joe disappeared, just a pile of guts. I had to tell him who he was because they had no way to identify him. That's another time the angel saved me. Christmas Eve of 1944 was the most holy night I've ever seen. My buddy McGee from Texas and I were in our foxhole, and we were kind of up above the Germans. They were down below us, about 200 yards across an open field. They were in the woods, and all of a sudden, the shooting stopped. It'd been going on incessantly for days. And the German guys down there started to sing that German song. Any Germans here? Tannenbaum, Christmas tree. They started to sing that song, and it's like the heavens opened up, and then they went into silent night, and I cried like a baby, and I still do when I hear the song. And it's one of those times when the war just stops, and you don't even feel cold. But in the Battle of the Bulge, people, you have to realize that we weren't fighting the Germans, we were fighting the weather. Imagine yourself living outside for about 6 weeks, never having a warm meal, never getting into a building, never having a blanket over you, being cold and miserable and scared and tired and hungry. That's the way we were. And I'll tell you something else, if I can speak frankly. How would you like to be in that foxhole and have diarrhea? Terrible, isn't it? And almost everybody was in the same boat. How do you handle it? Those are the things that we put up with. One time we were going through the woods. We were spread out about 6 feet apart. And all of a sudden we hear, "Handy ho." And we turned around, and there were 6 Germans behind us with these Schmeiser machine pistols. They had been in a trapdoor, and after we went by, they opened up and came out. They could have murdered us, but they didn't. They surrendered. They didn't like war either. We ran into so many things. The worst shelling of the war took place right there. Our company had 156 men in it. We lost 143 of them that day from a shelling. And the reason we got shelled like that was because the day before, George Patton came to visit us, and he took away our trenching tools. Who knows what a trenching tool is? It's a little shovel. We couldn't even scrape a little area to lay down in because he said, you're not going to stop long enough to dig in. But when we got butchered by that artillery fire, it made a difference. I had a buddy, I told you I'm going to tell you things you don't see in the movies. I had a buddy, his name was Evans. We called him Cigar Evans. He always had a cigar in his mouth. He got hit, and I went by his foxhole, and he was laying there begging me to shoot him. He was just a pile of guts. He was wide open, just like he was all angleworms on him, you know. And he wanted me to kill him. I couldn't. Could you? I couldn't either. I couldn't shoot him, but I've seen him in my dreams for 60 years, you know. And those are the kind of things that you run into in war. You don't see them in the movies. They can't show stuff like that. We had an artillery battalion next to us, and they were supposed to be there to protect us from aircraft. And one day, this airplane was coming in at us, and they started shooting. And they got him, they knocked him down, and they were, yay, we got him, yeah. Right before it hit the ground, we could see the star on it. It was one of ours. And they thought that was funny. So then after the Battle of the Bulge came and everything backed off, we had a chance to go into a German town. And I can remember it had like a big apartment house where our company went. And we booted everybody out of the building, and we just took it over. And I can remember climbing into a bed with my boots and everything on, just the way I was. I put the blanket over my head and I went to sleep. And so did everybody else. And nobody was going to argue with us about that. But it was so great. And then finally, we got a warm meal. Now, I'll tell you something. We take everything for granted, including hot water and electricity and stuff. Don't. It's really something. And you can't live without that stuff. But when you don't have it, you'd be surprised how far back you go in life. You go back 200 years. Then it came time to cross the Rhine River. There was one bridge that the Germans didn't blow up. They used it to get across themselves. It's a bridge at Remagen, it was called. And when we got there, there was so much traffic that they stretched a rope, a big bull rope about that big around, across the river. 2 jeeps pulled it as tight as they could. We held onto that and walked across. And the river was cold. This is the end of January now. And it was cold. And when you come out of there freezing, where do you go? You just sit somewhere and shiver. So I'm telling you what the guys that were over there had to go through. Besides fighting Germans, they had this weather thing, and it was horrible. Okay, then as we got into Germany, we hit the concentration camps. Rather, they were murder camps is what they were. The first one I saw, we had tanks come up ahead of us, and they just drove right through the fences that were there to open them up because all the gates were locked. And we could see these sticks up ahead of us with a head on them. And as we got closer, we could see they weren't sticks at all. They were human beings that were so skinny that there was just nothing left. There was a pole with a head on it, and that was a live human being. Now, Eisenhower showed up, and he ordered every mess kitchen in the area to come there and start preparing some soups, for one thing. And we tried to give them soup. There isn't a soul there that could take it. They were too far gone. It's just, you can't believe it. You go around the corner, and there's a pile of naked bodies the size of a football field and 50 feet high. All naked, just all piled up with bulldozers. This is the way that madman Hitler treated those people. This is why we had to get him. This is why the world had to get that guy. He was so insane. At these camps, you know, you see on television how bad they look. It tears you apart when you go in there and you see where they made them sleep and what they gave them to eat and how they burned them alive in furnaces, how they gassed them. And anybody that would complain, just shoot them, just drag them out in the pile and leave them lay. One thing that we did after we got in this one camp, there was all kinds of dead bodies laying around. We went into town and got who's the German here? What is the mayor? Obermeister? Over something? We got the Obermeister and made him get his whole council and their wives. And you should have seen some of these howdy women. We made them come out in their high heels and their hairdos and tow these naked bodies over to a ditch and put them in there to bury them. And you should have seen the looks on their faces. They all pretended like they didn't know anything about it. How could you not know? You know, the smell alone, for 5 miles, you could tell that there were burning bodies in there. Okay, so we go and we liberated 5 or 6 of those places like that, and each one worse than the last. It seems like there was no end to it. So finally, the war started to edge down a little bit, and it got to be a little more fun. We had a chance. They brought the 3rd Army tanks in, and we put 1 squad on each tank and ride until there was somebody shooting at us. Then the tanks would stop. We'd get off and sit down behind them. The tanks would line up and level everything you could see for miles. That's what they should do today, get rid of it. Well, I'm serious. If it saved 1 American life, you know, pay hundreds of millions for weapons and then leave them stored because it's inhumane. Bull. If they hadn't dropped the atom bomb on Japan, I wouldn't be here today, because we were all set to go through the Panama Canal from Europe and invade Japan. And you know, they figured we were going to lose 10 million men on that, because everybody in Japan was ready to sacrifice. So that's part of what war was. It's part of what I went through. And then we met the Russians. And then we had a little bit of humor there. They were like, almost like hillbillies. They were. These guys were, compared with what we were used to, they acted a little simple. They danced and jigged with each other and this and that. And I had a Jeep that I had accumulated. And I had 2 Russian guys come up to me and offer to buy it. And I said, what are you going to pay for it with? Well, we've got American dollars. So I sold it to them for 500 American bucks, which is like 10,000 today, I guess. And what they did was just humorous. They took this thing up on the hill above the Elbe River, and they taped the horn down. There was a horn on those Jeeps. They taped the horn down until the battery was dead, and then they pushed the thing in the river. That's their mentality. Yeah, and that's why when we came home and they had this Cold War, they're so afraid of what's going to happen, we knew nothing could happen. It was all a big farce, you know. After the war, we got into Czechoslovakia. That's my heritage. I was treated like a king by the Czechs because they knew that I was a kid. All my grandparents came out of Bohemia. And they put 1 man in each house, and then they took care of us there until it was time to go home. Now, when it was time to come home, you had to have 70 points to be in the first batch to get to go home. I had 69 points. You got 1 point for service and 2 for a medal, and you know. And as it turned out, I had 2 more medals that they didn't give me credit for. I had more than enough points. So instead of going home in July, I didn't get home until the following January, 6 months later. And that's basically my story. I got a lot more I can tell, but there's ladies present. And I want you to know that kids need to hear how horrible that was. They get, you know, like this madman over there in Iran who said the Holocaust never happened. Well, they should take and rub his nose on the floor of one of those places, because it did happen. And I just want the world to know that freedom is not free. I'm speaking this afternoon, I told you, I think, over at the Plymouth Middle School. And I want to impress on those kids that freedom is not free. And don't take things for granted, because somebody had to pay a price for them. Somebody. I love you all, and I thank you for the opportunity. If anybody wants to make a donation to our cause, we'll accept it. If not, that's fine too, because I'm going to try to help this group from now on. Thank you. Have a good day. I just wanted to mention one more thing. I wanted to tell you how I lost my hearing. It was during that same attack I told you about. That was the worst bombing that we had.
There we go.
Yeah, it was during that big bombing. There was a concussion shell that went off, and I can still hear it. It felt like it was right about here, and it went off, and there was no steel in it, but the concussion took my hearing. I haven't heard since. You know, it's just been a big buzzing ever since. And everybody that I knew that came back from that Battle of the Bulge had frozen feet. Mine were black. They wanted to cut them off along with everybody else's. We wouldn't let them. And they've kind of come back. My legs are dead, and they have been. And there's nothing you can do about it. But that's just another part where you got hurt. And then on March 12th, I think it was, we're going through the woods, and we hear this, Eins, zwei, drei, Heil Hitler, bang! And there was a tank right ahead of us with an 88, which is a 3mm gun, shooting right straight ahead. And he had concussion shells that would go about 300 yards and then explode. And that's where we were. We hit the ground. I got a piece in my hand. It felt like my arm was ripped off. And the kid next to me, a kid by the name of Murphy, I'll never forget this. Murphy was an Irish kid with coal black hair. I looked over at him, and so help me God, his hair was pure white. He was so scared. I've talked with several doctors since, and they said it's possible. That guy's hair turned white in less than a minute. And he got killed. A piece of shrapnel went right through his back. And so that's how I lost my hearing. I froze my feet. And yet, some of these guys that we're trying to work for and help were much worse off than this. That's why I'm here. And your heart has to go out to those guys. You guys know this. My heart goes out to all of you. You're trying to do the same thing, and it's wonderful. Stay with it. It'll work. While I was in combat, I was called in one night to the command post. And they said, Kovar, you are lucky. I said, why? He said, you're going home. And I said, what do you mean going home? He said, your appointment to West Point came through. My old English teacher had applied for West Point for me. And a guy by the name of Dick Gale was the congressman up here, and he appointed me to West Point. And I turned it down because I could see that the war was ending, and I wasn't going to sign up for 6 more years for anybody.
What did you do professionally?
Oh, well, I went to college, and my daddy had a manufacturing business. He made farm machinery. And he needed me, so I quit school. I need 13 credits to graduate from the university. I could take balloon blowing and dancing and stuff like that, but I'm not going to do that. And we made an implement called a harrow, spike-tooth harrows. We sold 75% of all of them that were sold in the country and Canada for 30, 40 years. I sold all that out back in '82. And that's what I did.